In this example, we're going to be applying the empirical rule. A company has a policy of retiring company cars. This policy looks at the number of miles driven, purpose of trips, style of car, and other features. The distribution of the number of months in service for the fleet of cars is bell-shaped, with a mean of 56 months and a standard deviation of 8 months. Using the 68-95-99.7 rule, which is otherwise known as the empirical rule, what is the approximate percentage of cars that service between 64 and 72 months? So the first thing we have to remember is that the bell curve, when we draw it, the highest point of the bell curve is the mean. And as you can see below, I put in the mean and the standard deviation, and it marked all the tick marks correctly, because one standard deviation from the mean would be 48 to 64. Two standard deviations from the mean would be 40 to 72, and then so on. So here, using the empirical rule, we do know that 68% of our data is one standard deviation from our mean. So from 48 to 64, there's 68% of cars driven lie between 48 and 64 months, meaning that this half is 34% and this half is 34%. And the 95% of the cars driven are 40 to 72 months, meaning that this little piece here in between 40 and 48 would be 13.5% and 13.5%. And lastly, the 99.7, and I know what that sounds like. It sounds like your entire number of cars. So the percentage, those 99.7% of the cars that remain in service is between 32 and 80 months, and in between 32 and 40 months would be 2.35%. And don't forget the usual rule where we know the entire bottom half of the bell curve is 50%, and the entire top half of the curve is 50%. All right, let's go ahead and now answer the question. We've drawn a bell curve, we've labeled it, and we've also labeled the percentages under the curve. So we just want to find out the approximate percentage of cars that remain in service between 64 and 72 months. So 64 and 72 months, notice that that's just the percentage in between 64 and 72 under the bell curve. And this would be 13.5%. So once again, when given a problem using the empirical rule or 68-95-99.7 rule, be sure to draw the bell curve and mark the tick marks on the bottom, starting with the mean in the middle with the highest point of the bell curve. And then go ahead and label each percentage under the bell curve in this manner, where it's 2.35, 13.5, 34, 34, 13.5, and 2.35. From there, the answering the problem is quite quick and not difficult.